And now for something completely different. So today's video is actually going to be in the vein of the Datura commentary that I did around 2021, I think it was, where basically I just did a sort of let's play, although I wasn't able to record footage as it was on the PS3 and I didn't have the technology required to record an emulator, so I just used some archived let's play footage of the game Datura on the PS3, which had some slight psychedelic influences, or delirium influences, because it was based on the Datura plant. So for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you've already figured out that we're talking about LSD Dream Emulator, a game for the PlayStation only ever released in Japan in October 22nd, 1998 by Asmic Ace Entertainment. It's an exploration game, but also very experimental, one of the most bizarre and out there games ever made, and probably the weirdest game ever made at the time, although there was a lot of weird 90s games. That weird sort of surreal 90s liminal aesthetic is just so insanely bizarre, and it still has a great deal of appreciation from people today, and I think people will always remember this game going forward because it just is so completely surreal, more so than any other game released at the time. The environments throughout the game become more surreal and psychedelic over time, because as the player moves through more and more dreams, the game actually adds more variety to the dreams by changing the textures more often. So after each dream, one day passes in the game, and the dream the player just experienced is marked on a graph. It's a bit like an exploration game, and it's literally just a playable dream. In fact, the creator of the game, Osamu Sato, actually based the game off the dreams of his wife, which is really interesting, because his wife must have some pretty messed up dreams. I mean, I can relate, my dreams are all over the place. So incomprehensible, yet there's always some form of structure and connection between all the weird environments. It's sort of fluid how you can go from one sort of liminal environment of a grassy field to sort of just, well, literally what you're looking at right now, giant grey alien babies jumping about, which is just, you just gotta love it, haven't you? The Japanese are the only people who can come up with this sort of stuff. For those of you who've never taken lysergic acid diethylamide, don't worry, nothing like this ever happens, although I can't say the same if you were going to take something like salvia and datura, or some like extreme delirium or dissociative. I definitely think you could experience something like this, to be honest. Personally, this is my first time playing the game, but I have heard about it for a very, very long time now. First instance of me hearing about it, I believe, was in a video that Kadikarus did, if you remember him. I do believe he's still going now, making content. Made it around, well, I'll flash it on screen now. It must be years and years and years ago, way before I got into the wacky world of psychedelics, and I was just a pure gamer. But I always found it really fascinating because I'd never seen anything like this at the time, and it just seemed so ahead of its time for bizarre experimental games, especially on the PS1. Obviously, as gaming's become more and more popular, and the rise of indie games, there's a lot more creative freedom that people have. I mean, you can literally just get on RPG Maker and make your own weird, bizarre, liminal space simulator for free. Back then, this was sort of revolutionary for the time. I can't think of any other games that had this extremely bizarre experimental feel to it, especially on the PS1. Obviously, there's a lot more of it nowadays with indie games and just the rise of gaming in general. Just any piece of art, say like film, as it takes off, starts to become more experimental as different people start to imbue it with their own weird ideas and wacky worlds that they want to manifest visually. So we see loads of these sort of strange games, and especially liminal space simulator games in today's world. But back then, this was really very unique, and it seemed to have gone over well with at least Japanese critics. It's funny because saying like the mid-2010s or early 2010s, I think, when there was a lot of sort of walking simulator games like Gone Home, I think it was called, and Dear Esther, there was a bit of a backlash from the epic gamer community where they were sort of dismissing it as just like pseudo games. There was nothing to them, saying that it was just fake pieces of pretentious art and that. When, funnily enough, there was even walking simulators going on back then on the PS1, because really all this is just an exploration game. You're just exploring these surreal environments without any objective, and you can only really move and touch objects, and all that'll do is just warp you to another setting. Basically, the player just keeps going round and round these weird dream worlds that apparently, according to the Wikipedia page, the game's original concept is based on a dream diary kept by an Asmic Ace employee for over a decade. But the actual producer of the game, Osamu Sato, he rejected the idea of games apparently and wanted to use the PlayStation as a medium for creating contemporary art, which is funny because if one of the developers of say like them walking simulators came out and said I'm using games as a medium for contemporary art and experimentation, back in like early 2010 you would get the Epic Gamer crew being like, oh, this is fake gamer stuff, this, give me my loot boxes or whatever gamers buzzed off in the early 2010s. It's so interesting to analyze the evolution of games and the reception to them, the controversies that have emerged, just the ebb and flow of just the gaming culture in the gaming world is absolutely fascinating. One of my most, even though I'd say like I do love games and I still play them a lot, and I'm always on the lookout for really big new ones, but yeah, they definitely have stagnated in the past few years. There was a golden era, in my opinion. I do think the PS2, sort of the 2000s, was the golden era for games. For me, personally, that's when pretty much most of my favourite games of all time came out. They were really pushing boundaries, were fun, immersive, and cool experimental ones that had like deep thematic symbolism in them, but weren't like sort of lifeless, pretentious games, because there are pretentious games out there, even though I don't think like all walking simulators are pretentious. There are a lot of really good ones, and ones that have really nailed the benefits of using that genre for your game. There's a lot of really atmospheric experiences that can be had, but some of them are literally just like they're the equivalent of say like pretentious art films in a way. Which I mean, I don't mind a pretentious art house film now and then, but sometimes, as Peter would say in Family Guy,
it insists upon itself, Lois.
I'm just going to read you some excerpts from the Wikipedia page, because there's loads of interesting information on here, and I know you guys like to hear me just ramble on, so I may as well give it a read. I did a similar one in my Datura trip report, where I just read loads of interesting trivia I'd found about the game on the internet, and just general information on Wikipedia and other sites. So yeah, basically, the game received a limited release in Japan, alongside a soundtrack and a book composed of excerpts from the Dream Diary. LSD Dream Emulator quickly fell into obscurity, but in the years since, has experienced a resurgence in popularity due to its eccentricity being an engaging point of discussion for humour blogs and Let's Play commentators. So yeah, that's where a lot of people will have heard of this game before, sort of Let's Players, game reviewers, like Kadikarus. Loads of people have covered it, and I thought it'd be just perfect for me to cover on the channel. I mean, I love games, weird stuff, and I love me psychedelics, lad. So I thought it'd be a nice little mashup of all three. Playing the game isn't necessarily a fun experience. Also, I had to emulate it, and apparently Asmic Ace Entertainment doesn't even care if you emulate it. They don't even list the game on the website. It's just sort of like fallen into public domain unofficially, in a sense. And I swear Osamu Sato actually encouraged the reimagined version of it. It's called like LSD reworked or reimagined. So the guy obviously just encourages people to experience it rather than wanting to get any sort of monetary gain from people playing it, which is really quite based. So yeah, the gameplay in LSD Dream Emulator, it features a variety of very surreal locations. The gameplay takes place purely in first-person perspective, and it's in a 3D environment, with the player's control limited to moving frontward and backward, turning, strafing, running, and looking behind. The game is played in levels, or dreams, lasting up to 10 minutes. The player begins each dream in a random area in which they can begin exploring. By walking into any object or walking through certain tunnels, the player will be transported to another setting. LSD has a set of several static and defined environments to explore, including a Japanese village, a field, a city, houses, a factory, among others. While the environments are static, the default textures are sometimes swapped, and they may also be populated with random objects, animals and characters, roaming about to add variety. Each dream ends after 10 minutes, in which the character wakes up, or ends early if the player interacts with certain objects or dies. This is actually quite interesting because it's sort of an early example, probably much earlier examples, of, well, definitely is earlier examples of sort of randomly generated games, but in terms of this sort of walking style game and exploration style bizarro simulator, having each level be randomly generated was very unique at the time. And I think it definitely inspired a lot of sort of wacky games that we see, like Yume Nikki, that are very surreal. And they sort of, in Yume Nikki, they take it a bit further to sort of add a bit more of a story to it. But this is just literally just like, yeah, strange world simulation sort of things. So, yeah, after each dream, 1 day passes in the game, and the dream the player just experienced is marked on a graph. The graph rates dreams in relation to being an upper, downer, static, or dynamic dream. As a player plays through more and more dreams, the game adds more variety to the dreams by changing textures more often. This results in the environments becoming more surreal and psychedelic over time. Sometimes when starting a new dream, a video is played instead of a playable dream. After a number of in-game days, a flashback option appears on the main menu, which allows the player to experience an abbreviated version of the last dream they played. There is a humanoid figure, also known as the Grey or Shadow Man, that may appear in some dreams, that if touched by the player, prevents them from using the flashback option and undoes any progress made from that dream. What's really funny about this is it ties into the sort of psychedelic or substance culture that on the internet with the Hat Man, because the Shadow Man very, very much is reminiscent of the classic Hat Man design that we see everywhere, and not even the design, the actual sort of being or the projection of the mind that people see on deliriants like DPH. So that's actually really interesting, because it ties into that idea of like where does the notion of the Hat Man come from, and it could be said that it is an element of our subconscious that spills out under certain states of being, states of consciousness, that we've sort of absorbed again subconsciously through our culture, because Hat Man type entities or characters have existed for ages really, and then seeing them sort of materialized in games like these where it's very reminiscent of the actual thing just makes you think that maybe the reason it comes up is because it's sort of in everyone's minds that and they don't know about it. Or again, you could tie it in with the sort of infinite consciousness angle that I like to waffle on about, where it's basically, I mean, anything is really possible if you take consciousness as being infinite. So the Hat Man as some like demonic being is something that consciousness can create up and experience in certain states, whether it's DPH induced or, I don't know, schizophrenia induced, just being having a general chemical makeup in your brain being out of whack. Who knows, but it's fun to speculate about, innit? So LSD Dream Emulator was conceived by Osamu Sato, a Japanese multimedia artist. Sato started his art career in photography and writing music in the 1980s, before turning to digital graphic design and computer art by the 1990s. In the 90s, he began experimenting with CD-ROM technology, creating animated 3D videos with a dimension of interactivity. Although these projects resembled video games, Sato's intent was not to create games but to use game platforms as a means of creating contemporary works of art. Sato's first such project was funded by Sony Music Entertainment Japan and released in 1994, titled Eastern Mind: The Lost Souls of Tong Nu, which is a point-and-click adventure game by the Japanese artist. The plot follows a man named Rin, whose soul is taken by the island of Tong Nu. Rin travels to Tong Nu to fulfill the lives of 9 creatures and regain his soul. Because Eastern Mind was released in the US and received some awards, Sato was able to source funding for his next project, which would become LSD Dream Emulator. Sato still rejected the idea of video games and wanted to use the PlayStation game console as a medium for creating art and music. He chose the PlayStation as a platform because he felt Sony was already embracing elaborate concepts, while he felt Sega and Nintendo had greater reputations as toy companies. That's really interesting, you know, because obviously the PlayStation zeitgeist of the past 10 years has been these very filmic sort of artsy games. I mean, not 100% artsy, The Last of Us and Uncharted and God of War and all the big Sony IPs, but they're definitely going for that more sort of like in-depth, dramatic, filmic feel to them. That is, yeah, again, more in line with traditional art as we know it, like films. There's sort of like deep narrative in them, symbolism, themes going on, which obviously is found in other games, but oftentimes in other games, say like Silent Hill 2, which has like a lot of depth to it in terms of its narrative and its themes and symbolism, it's a lot more sort of out there and dreamlike, a bit more Lynchian, if you'd put it. Whereas the PlayStation sort of titles at the minute that are very quite artsy and filmic are more so like Americanized Hollywood films, which, again, these are just words, aren't they? I don't think there's one thing's better than the other. I prefer games when they're a lot more experimental, but if you prefer sort of the more filmic, narrative based games that do have a lot of like traditional gameplay in them, but take a semi backseat to say the games that inspired them. Like, I mean, the original God of War games are nothing like the new God of War at all, and the gameplay in that was key. But in the new ones, it's like a balance of gameplay and narrative, and it just whatever works for you, really. But yeah, it's interesting that he chose PlayStation as a platform to go to for his sort of artistic vision, because, I mean, truthfully, Sega and Nintendo at the time of, say, the late 90s, they didn't really have a sort of like artsy game really going on. I mean, as Sega and Nintendo really had a proper artsy game like sort of Shadow of the Colossus, Silent Hill 2, anything like that. I don't really think they have, and that's not a problem at all, because the beauty of, say, those publishers' games, especially Nintendo games, with Zelda and Metroid and Mario, is the tightness of the gameplay. They're just king at making amazing gameplay and designing their games in such an engaging sort of beautiful manner. Really, there's beauty in the design of the gameplay in, say, Zelda, where even though funnily enough, it's actually untrue what I just said there, because, say, Majora's Mask is probably one of the artsiest sort of like traditional children's games ever made. So that's the only one I can really think of right now. Mother 3 and, say, Earthbound, they get pretty deep, bro. Although I can't really say anything for Sega. Although Sonic 06 and Shadow the Hedgehog did get pretty deep at parts. Fucking emo simulator, we gotta love it though, haven't you? So Sato got the idea for LSD after playing racing games. He found racing games difficult and boring since he was not a skilled player, and so he imagined the possibilities of smashing the car into a wall and transporting the player to another dimension. He thought it would be more enjoyable for players like him that were unskilled at other games. And from there, he got the idea of creating an imaginary world of the same irrationality and easily forgettable nature as dreams. He did not give the game any objectives because, according to him, they are not essential in video games, because even natural human existence cannot be reduced to simple objectives. What a really interesting point of inspiration. So, really, the more I read about this, it just really seems like it set the stage for out there games, much like LSD Dream Emulator, games that have like no objective, sort of just experience games, really. It definitely paved the way for that. I don't think it was like 100% influential on all of the games we see today that are in the vein of just being experience simulators, but it definitely has its place in history as being one of the first to sort of have an auteur-like quality to its production. The other video game auteurs would be like Hideo Kojima, where, say, obviously there is a game there's a lot of great gameplay design in Metal Gear Solid, but it also is a vehicle for sort of an artistic vision, which is, again, like, it's sort of like being an auteur, very similar to, say, visionary filmmakers. So yeah, they sort of set the scale for, again, there's a lot of people you can point to now. Even, say, like Neil Druckmann, whatever you think of The Last of Us, he has a vision for his games and what he wants to say through them. And like, I'm not the biggest like fan of Last of Us 2. I really like Last of Us 1. But yeah, even so, I respect the fact that this guy obviously has a vision and doesn't let people impede on it, whether you like that vision or not. So I rate the fact that Sato was just wanting to do what he wanted and use the vehicle of games to express his ideas. It's great. It makes games more interesting and varied. And that's why I'm open to every genre pretty much. That's why I really enjoyed Death Stranding a few years ago. Again, I really like Hideo Kojima's games because they're just so bizarre. Metal Gear Solid is amazing. Hey, oh, there he is, the Hat Man. Just speaking of, mate, definitely him, innit? he's not only is he invading fucking children's Benadryl trips, he's now invading these bloody kids' video games. Like, imagine playing a game like this when you're younger, because like, well, obviously you'd be in Japan, wouldn't you? LSD Dream Emulator. I don't think they really have a massive psychedelic scene over there. From people I've spoke to live in Japan, substance culture over there is just, I don't know if it's necessarily shunned upon. I just don't really think it exists that much. There'll be people obviously who smoke weed and consume whatever and probably take psychedelics, but there's definitely not a culture surrounding it as there is in the West, especially in English-speaking countries. But yeah, getting back to it. Where was I? Oh yeah, for inspiration, Sato pulled ideas from a dream diary written by Hiroku Nishikawa, a game designer at Asmic Ace Entertainment who had been writing in the diary for about a decade. As Sato is also a musician, He composed the game's soundtrack using samples to create around 500 musical patterns. He felt this approach more closely resembled the chaos of a dream state, in contrast to full drawn-out melodies. That's very interesting as well, yeah, because, say, that sort of has a bit of a psychedelic influence there, because I don't know if this guy ever took psychedelics, because later on in the article it says the title LSD is a reference to the drug of the same name, lysergic acetylamiide, which was in a bid to attract the hippie and psychedelic subcultures. The acronym was not given any single interpretation in the game, so whether he actually was inspired by literal psychedelic substances is another story. But yeah, I find that really interesting that he went with these sort of unorthodox melodies, because at the end of the day, dreams can be fully unorthodox or all over the place, a mishmash of pretty much everything going on in your mind, your subconscious, things you've experienced during the day, your interests, things, your fears, etc., and they all jumble together. So yeah, it wouldn't be as drawn out and full as, say, waking life, whether you say, like, is reality just one big dream? If so, it's like the most incredibly conjured, fully drawn out dream in the world, whereas like our dreams are like a fragment of, say, like reality, if you want to go from this angle. I'm not saying any of this is true, this is just me rambling at the end of the day. So when you say, like, I've heard music in my dreams, and yeah, they are it's sort of chaotic, like bleep, bloop, 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 bloop. There's not really a pinpoint melody that you can really remember. It's just sort of a mishmash of everything. So he was particularly influenced from music coming out of England's Warp record label, which is really interesting, which is a British independent record label founded in Sheffield in 1989. So yeah, big up Sheffield boys, Yorkshire massives. Initially he was going to include more pentatonic scales and melodies to give the game an Asian flair, but he came to realise this was not necessary after seeing the international success of Japanese producers like Ken Ishii, and Ken Ishii is a Japanese DJ and record producer. He's gone under the pseudonyms FLR, Flare, U2, Yoga, and Rising Sun, who was later featured on a remix soundtrack featuring some of the game's music. The acronym was not oh, I've just read that bit. I'm just going off. Oh, mate, this bit's class. It's probably one of the most famous bits of the game when the big face man comes out. It's unreal. Absolutely iconic, that. Look at state of our lad. That's just brilliant. It would skit you out, this, if you're actually on psychedelics playing it. It would be pure PTSD, would be like LSD PTSD emulator instead, or PTSD dream emulator. So instead, there are many interpretations of the acronym in the game of LSD, such as in life, the sensuous dream, and in limbo, the silent dream. Sato felt this represented the chaos and confusion of dreams. So yeah, moving on to the release section of the Wikipedia article. The game was released in Japan on October 22nd, 1998, and Sato had hoped for an American release as with East in mind, but he had no further say in localization. So that's why when you actually emulate this game, you've got to get an English fan translation, an actual patch for it, because it was never localized. And LSD actually only sold a few copies, and yeah, as I said in the beginning of the video, it's very rare to find on secondary markets and sells for high prices when it becomes listed. LSD was released as a standalone game and in a limited edition set, but came with a bonus CD titled Lucy in the Sky with Dynamites and a book called Lovely Sweet Dream. The CD contains about an hour of acid techno music, and the book is composed of excerpts from Nishikawa's Dream Diary. The book has English translations of many dreams and illustrations provided by a wide variety of artists. Sato was adamant about releasing a special soundtrack, so a double disc soundtrack compilation titled LSD and Remixes was issued alongside the game. I wonder if it's on Spotify. I'm going to absolutely bosh that in when I'm next driving about. I love driving about listening to full albums because it's the best way for me to absorb them. I have to bosh that on and see how funky they are, because I'm a big fan of sort of like techno and acid music, and acid techno, combining together. Best of both worlds, innit? The LSD and Remixes soundtrack features mixes by Ken Ishii, Jimmy Tenor, a Finnish musician, Uzik, which is an English electronic musician from London, he was quite involved in sort of the IDM style tunes in the 90s with Aphex Twin and like Square Pusher and the drill and bass type artists that were coming about. And Morgan Geist, who is an American music songwriter, producer, mix engineer, and DJ. Among mainstream music consumers, he's best known for his UK #1 song Look Right Through, recorded under the alias Storm Queen. So, interestingly enough, there was a lot of influences going on in this game. It wasn't just some wacky, I just want to make my psychedelic dreamlike vision through video games. He actually really thought about what he wanted to do with it, the sort of feeling he wanted to give the player. There's a lot of uncanny elements to this game with all the weird entities and the visuals and the environments you find yourself in. It really is quite a trip, although funnily enough, it wasn't 100% inspired by the actual experience of being on lysergic acid or diethylamide, but it more so was just sort of like this guy's... I mean, dreams in general are trippy anyway, so it's always going to have that trippy quality to it, and that's why I say you can be in very much dreamlike states and psychedelics and other psychoactive substances. In terms of reception, LSD Dream Emulator quickly fell into obscurity after release due to its limited availability and the eccentric nature of its content, but it did gain an avid cult following in subsequent years. The cause of its growing interest among Western audiences years after its release is a mystery to Sato. Motherboard wrote that its popularity is due to the internet, primarily from appearances on humour blogs like Crack.com and YouTube Let's Play video curators who feed off the game's quirky qualities. It is a great game to just Let's Play, isn't it? Because you can say so much about it and just chat so much shit. A lot of games sometimes are just not suited for Let's Plays. You can Let's Play any game you want, really. I mean, Let's Plays were massive. They're not really big anymore, are they? But that was like the shit on YouTube, wasn't it? It's made the biggest YouTubers ever, like PewDiePie. And what was he doing? He was literally just doing amnesia mods, and they were so popular. I mean, this is what started my YouTube addiction and my fascination, really, because I did Let's Plays. I mean, probably a lot of people listening did Let's Plays. It was just one of them things you did. It was a lot of fun. And games like these were perfect for it because there's so much weird stuff to it, and since there's no objective, you can just sort of fill it in with your humour, and that was the best thing about Let's Plays. It wasn't really about the game, it was about the person playing it and what they brought to the table and how they made it entertaining and amusing for people. Hardcore Gaming 101 concluded that the popularity of LSD Dream Emulator is a testament to the consumer demand for hallucinogenic and experimental games. And yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Even more so, there's still a lot of psychedelic inspired games, and I feature a lot of them in my videos in sort of the background footage. So many of them, like Manifold Garden, like Antichamber that have psychedelic feels to it. But there isn't really like a lot of straight up ones, and LSD Dream Emulator, it's actually in the title, it sort of wants you to realise that, yeah, it's a straight up psychedelic inspired game. Not so much, say, of the experience of psychedelics, but sort of like the psychedelic subculture and hippie, dreamy, weirdo vibes that a lot of like psychonauts are into, like respectfully so, because I mean psychonauts love just out there things. A lot of psychonauts are into, say, like games and anime and film and just unconventional, abnormal things, because I mean they're really cool, aren't they? I think they are. Enough people contacted Sony about LSD Dream Emulator that they re-released it on the Japanese PlayStation Network in 2010, generating even more interest. That's actually interesting that people contacted him and said, get this on there. So Sato has noticed young audiences visiting his art exhibits because they heard about him due to LSD's online popularity. English indie rock band Alt J received permission from Sato directly to use a screenshot from LSD for the cover art of their studio album Relaxer. Oh my god, it actually is as well. That's so mad. They've got some good tunes them as well. I've seen that album about. I never made the connection. Now seeing it makes so much sense. In 2011, a fan began developing an unofficial remake made in the Unity engine for PC, with a public alpha version being made available in 2014. Not actually sure if that's out yet. Possibly would be in development hell. Although the English fan translation was released in 2020, so who knows. Regarding the quality of the game itself, Killscreen called LSD one of the most unnerving and unpredictable weird video games ever made. Hardcore Gaming 101 said there's never been another video game that so effectively conferred the feeling of an actual dream, and continues saying that the game is somewhat dated but is still worth experiencing. They compared the game to the comic series Little Nemo and the Sandman, as well as the film Dreams, and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland as a work of art designed to emulate dreams. I love stuff like that. I'm a big Lynch fan, Twin Peaks, up there, one of my very favourite shows. I love Mulholland Drive. I find when artists are able to tap into the feeling and the elements of dreams and convey them through their art, and especially visual art, it can be some of the most profound, awe-inspiring pieces of art ever. Again, like David Lynch's Mulholland Drive and Twin Peaks, are just so unbelievably dense in terms of how they're designed. There's so many ways you can interpret it, and it's just so ridiculously chaotic that it just keeps you engaged to just the bitter end, really, because much like your dreams, they're just so fascinating and inspire you a lot. and great art can inspire, and especially for me, dreamlike art, especially sort of weird video games, because Silent Hill 2 is very dreamlike and sort of nightmarish, but there's always just like some depth in it. There's always, you can analyze your dreams and find out a lot about yourself, as I've talked in many videos. And dream inspired media and just pieces of art are really some of the best fictional works like that, and just pieces of art are oftentimes the most powerful for me to observe. And I'm a massive fan of like surrealism, such as Salvador Dali, and I've used many of his pieces of art as thumbnails for my video, and I like to just feature, again, surrealist imagery for many of my videos, because it really does tie in with these sort of illogical, like trans-rational experiences that people have on psychedelics, and because mysticism is very much beyond the sort of normal robotic human mindset that many people are just, is it right-brained or left-brained? Correct me on that if whatever I'm saying. So it's like right-brained people are a lot more sort of again, yeah, logical by the numbers, whereas dreams are sort of more left-brained, but it's just sort of like all out there, very they're not limited by sort of our human perception. They can just be anything they want, and I think that ties in deeper with the sort of the truth of reality that is sort of like this illogical, strange, loopy, paradoxical thing that we're all tied up in. But the human realm is sort of one of infinite realms, and they don't necessarily have to be tied down to sort of like physical matter. It's just one piece of consciousness, one fragment of how our life, or not even life, our existence can be. Yeah, pretty interesting, I'd say. Hope you enjoyed this video. It's just a lot of me just reading the Wikipedia article. I don't really have much else to say on the game. I enjoyed experiencing it finally, because I've always been fascinated by this game and just wanted to see what it'd like to play it. And whilst it wasn't necessarily enjoyable, it was definitely memorable and goes up there, one of the strangest games I've ever played. And I just love strange stuff, whether it's good or bad. I even appreciate sort of shitty movies that obviously have a really great concept, and they really try to do the best with it. And even though it might not be great in terms of like other elements like acting or production value, oftentimes the spirit of the film or the spirit of any piece of art can get through to you, even if the whole thing isn't necessarily the greatest thing ever. And I definitely got that with LSD Dream Emulator. So let me know if you'd like me to cover any more psychedelic games like these. I'll have a look see for you. But there's not really many that are as famous or as influential as this one. I mean, look at state of him. Look at state of our Wes running back. What are you saying, lad? It's just quality. Where else do you get that? You don't see that anywhere. So, yep, hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video.